1815. The smoke rising over Waterloo marked the end of not only a battle, but an empire. Napoleon was sailing into exile. Europe was preparing for a new era. The Bourbon monarchy returned to the throne, but the spirit of revolution still lived in the hearts of the people. Many believed this was the end, but France was about to shake Europe once again through revolutions and wars over the next century. After Napoleon's defeat, Louis XVIII returned to the throne of France. The monarchy had returned, but France was no longer the same country. Veterans, workers, and merchants feared that the freedoms won during the revolution would disappear. The kings had returned, but the seeds of another revolution had already been planted. In 1824, Louis XVIII died. His brother, Charles X, became King of France. The new king tried to restore the old privileges of the nobility and the church. Freedom of the press was restricted. Opposition newspapers were forced into silence. The people's anger grew stronger every day. France was standing on the brink of another revolution. In 1830, Charles X issued the July Ordinances, stripping away even more of the people's freedoms. The people of Paris refused to remain silent. The streets quickly filled with barricades. For 3 days, bloody battles raged through the streets of Paris. The revolution had succeeded. Charles X was forced from the throne and fled France. After the revolution, Louis Philippe was proclaimed not King of France, but King of the French. The economy began to grow. Industry and commerce rapidly transformed France. But prosperity did not reach everyone. Workers endured long hours under harsh conditions. The gap between rich and poor continued to widen. France was drifting toward another explosion. The disastrous harvest of 1788 pushed France into a severe food crisis. Bread prices soared, leaving ordinary people unable to afford even the basic necessities. Meanwhile, the aristocracy at Versailles continued to enjoy extravagant banquets. Hunger and anger now filled the same streets. Revolution was closer than ever before. In 1789, France's representatives gathered at Versailles for the first time in 175 years. The assembly was divided into 3 estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate representing the common people. But the voting system remained unchanged. Millions of commoners were outweighed by the privilege to estates. The third estate would remain silent no longer. Their next move would ignite the first true spark of the French Revolution. When the meetings began, the Third Estate faced a bitter disappointment. Despite representing most of the population, their votes still counted no more than those of the other 2 estates. They believed meaningful reform was impossible unless the voting system changed. After days of heated debate, they prepared to make a historic decision. They no longer saw themselves as just one estate, but as the true representatives of the French people. Their next step would shake the foundations of the monarchy. On the morning of June 20th, 1789, the deputies of the Third Estate found the assembly hall locked. They believed the king was trying to silence them. The deputies moved to a nearby indoor tennis court and swore they would never separate until France had a new constitution. History remembers this as the tennis court oath. The oath marked the point of no return. The first open challenge to absolute monarchy had begun, and the French Revolution was now unstoppable. Tension in Paris had reached its peak. The people armed themselves and turned toward one of the strongest symbols of royal power, the Bastille prison. On July 14, 1789, thousands of Parisians stormed the Bastille. After hours of fighting, the fortress fell, announcing the revolution to the world. The fall of the Bastille was more than the capture of a prison. It marked the collapse of absolute monarchy's grip and the beginning of a new era. Only weeks after the fall of the Bastille, the National Assembly began drafting a historic document that would shape the future of France. Adopted on August 26, 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen proclaimed liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty as the revolution's core principles. The French people were no longer seen merely as subjects of the king, but as citizens with rights. Yet the revolution's most turbulent days were still ahead. The bread shortage had not ended. On October 5, 1789, thousands of Parisian women marched toward the Palace of Versailles to protest hunger and soaring food prices. When the crowd reached the palace, events quickly spiraled out of control. Clashes erupted with the royal guards, and the palace's security began to collapse. Yielding to the pressure, King Louis XVI agreed to move with his family to Paris. From that moment on, the king was no longer protected by Versailles, but watched by the revolution. In 1791, King Louis XVI secretly decided to flee Paris with his family to escape the revolution. His plan was to reach the border and regain control. The escape did not last long. Recognized in the town of Varennes, the king was stopped by the National Guard and escorted back to Paris with his family. The failed escape destroyed the last remaining trust in the king. For many French citizens, the future no longer lay in constitutional monarchy, but in a republic. On August 10, 1792, an angry crowd stormed the Tuileries Palace. After fierce fighting with the Swiss guards, royal authority effectively collapsed. A few weeks later, the National Convention met and officially abolished the centuries-old French monarchy. France was now a republic. King Louis XVI was no longer a monarch, but a prisoner awaiting trial. The revolution had reached the point of no return. In December 1792, King Louis XVI went on trial for treason. The revolutionaries believed that even a king was no longer above the law. On the morning of January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was led to the guillotine. With a single blade, not only a king, but centuries of absolute monarchy came to an end. The king's execution shocked Europe. Monarchies feared the revolution would spread to their own lands and began preparing for war against France. France was now fighting not only foreign enemies, but also internal opposition. Power increasingly concentrated in the hands of the Committee of Public Safety and Maximilien Robespierre. During the Reign of Terror in 1793 and 1794, thousands were executed by guillotine. Even the slightest suspicion could lead to a death sentence. But the revolution eventually turned against its own leaders. In 1794, Robespierre was arrested and executed by guillotine the following day. As the Reign of Terror ended, France began searching for a new leader. In 1799, Napoleon carried out the coup of 18 Brumaire and seized power. The revolution had not ended, but its direction was now in the hands of one man. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. The revolution had overthrown a king, yet France now stood under an even more powerful emperor. After the Reign of Terror, France was searching for stability. At that moment, a young general began capturing the nation's attention through a series of remarkable victories. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's conquests had reshaped Europe, but in 1812, the invasion of Russia ended in disaster, and France's once invincible army suffered devastating losses. In 1815, the Battle of Waterloo sealed Napoleon's fate. After his defeat, he abdicated the throne and was sent into exile. With Napoleon's fall, Europe was reshaped once again, as the Congress of Vienna sought to restore the old order. The ideals of liberty and nationalism unleashed by the French Revolution could no longer be contained. After the Revolution, France passed through coups, empires, and republics. Yet no era could erase the legacy of 1789. Liberty, equality, and fraternity became values not only of France, but of the modern world. The revolution's influence crossed continents and reshaped the future of millions. What began with the fall of a monarchy helped inspire the rise of modern democracy. If you enjoyed this journey through history, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next chapter in our series.